Good evening, Supercoaches, and welcome to the third edition of Timmy's Fear Factor for the Supercoach 360 podcast team. Now, if you haven't heard the first two episodes or read it yet, please go and check us out at supercoach360.com. Jump on, have a read, listen to the two previous recordings, and by all means share it with your friends, with your public on Facebook or any of your other social media formats. So what is Fear Factor? Fear Factor will be a weekly segment with the boys on the Tuesday evening show, if all goes to plan. And each week I'm going to dissect the statistics of three key players that are deemed Supercoach relevant, not only for the next round, but for the foreseeable future as well. And I'll give them a Fear Factor rating of 1 to 5. The idea of this being that it should assist Supercoaches with gaining a better understanding of some of those players' previous scores against the team that they're going to play this week or in the coming weeks. And it's going to help them out by giving them a better understanding of how they've gone against those particular opponents in previous games, whilst at the same time give them a bit more of an idea of maybe some of those particular players and how they might not only just trade them in or trade them out for that particular round, but also if they can possibly use them as a captain or vice-captain option for that particular week. Now this week I've decided to focus on three highest percentage owned front row forwards, and I'll use this week's round one data from those particular players and look at their previous data from previous seasons and give you some kind of an idea on their performance history and how that may affect them over the coming weeks. And I'll give them a Fear Factor rating again of 1 to 5. So as it stands, this is extremely relevant to my particular team, the Lightweights FC, as the three players that I'm going to identify this week, I've actually currently only got one of them in my side. So after performances from the weekend, especially with one player in particular, I'm starting to look at options and possible ways of maybe getting him in for this round. So with no further ado, we'll get stuck into it. The first Fear Factor player that I'm looking at this week is Payne Haas. Now, Payne Haas is arguably the most feared front rower in NRL Supercoach. The bloke is a one-man wrecking ball in both attack and defence, and I, for one, am extremely scared of what this man mountain can do as a Supercoach player. He's currently at 54% ownership, so obviously there's plenty of other coaches that agree. Now, across the last season, he scored 1,359 Supercoach points with an average of 68 points per game, and that was across an average of 60 minutes per game. This equated to 1.13 points per minute, and that was through a 20-game cycle sample size from last season. In the opening rounds of 2022, my beloved Broncos, that Payne Haas actually plays for, obviously, have a mixed bag of games against both top and bottom teams from last year's competition. Last Friday night, the boys kicked off the season with a hard-fought win against the Bunnies, winning that game 11 points to 4. Now, in past seasons, Payne has averaged 64 Supercoach points against South Sydney with a top score of 81. On Friday night, though, he pumped out a new PB with 91 Supercoach points in 71 minutes of game time, and that was all on pure brace stats. In the game, he had 24 runs for 188 metres, including a massive 76 post-contact metres. He also made 38 tackles, which shows he's just as good in defence as he is with the ball in his hand. And naturally, if he keeps those sorts of scores up, his ownership will skyrocket before too much longer. In round two, the Broncos play the Bulldogs on Sunday afternoon, and against the Doggies, he averages 58 Supercoach points with a top score of 85. The Dogs got off to a winning start themselves against the Cowboys, although the game went down to the wire. It was a pretty dire affair to watch on TV, that's for sure. In round three, Haas plays our traditional Queensland derby game against the North Queensland Cowboys here at Suncorp Stadium on a Sunday afternoon. In past seasons, Haas has averaged 73 Supercoach points against North Queensland with a high score of 82 points. This is always a cracking game of footy, regardless of where both teams are on the table, and I'll be there at the game, no doubt with beer in hand, and it's always going to be the game is just always a cracker. So I've got no doubt that it's going to continue on that way. In the following rounds, Payne has the Warriors, at which he scored 88 points on average with a 104-point max. He then has the Roosters with an 81 points per game average, 102 max, and the Panthers with a 93 average and 112 max, which at a glance suggests that generally Payne Haas seems to score better against the higher teams in the competition. Obviously, then the stronger forward packs that he seems to face as well seems to get him more Supercoach points. Now, look, let's be real. If the Broncos are going to have a big season this year, they're going to need Payne Haas firing on all cylinders. So, look, performance that he played against on the Friday night against the Bunnies, if that's anything to go by, he's going to be in for a really big season, and the Broncos certainly need him fit and firing. So the reasons why I didn't... Well, let's try again. So I don't actually have Payne Haas, and this is one of the biggest reasons as to why I've identified him for a Fear Factor player this week. So to be completely honest, the price tag of $595,800 was just too big for me to fit into my starting team at the start of the year with the game plan that I was running for this Supercoach 2022 season. The reason for that being that I started with Tommy Turbo at fullback and James Tedesco, and also went with David Fafita in the second row. So unfortunately I had to make some cuts somewhere, and with those three players costing a fair amount of my 10 million budget, I had to try and find somewhere to squeeze, and Payne Haas just didn't quite make it as much as I would love to have him there. So look, the guy's an absolute beast. He scores at will. If he continues, like I said, the rest of the season is how he started on Friday night, he's going to be an absolute must in your front row, and I'm already starting to look at ways that I can possibly get him in sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks. As far as the fear factor goes, I've given him a 5 out of 5 because the bloke is just amazing. He grabs the ball, he hits hard, and just scores Supercoach points at will. So the second player I'm going to have a look at this week is someone from the Broncos' opponents on Friday night, and that is Jai Arrow. Now, Jai Arrow's been a staple in a lot of Supercoach teams over the years, but let's be honest, he's getting a little bit older since moving to Souths from the Gold Coast Titans. You just don't know from 1 week to the next how many minutes he's going to get. He's played a bit of front row, he's played a bit of lock, he's played in the second row, he's played off the bench. They've tried to play Jai Arrow everywhere, and they just don't seem to be getting the best out of him. Now, he's currently at 20% ownership, so there's obviously a lot of coaches that are all over him and hoping that because he's starting in the second row that he's going to score fairly well. Now, he's also dual, so teams have probably got him up there in their front row for a bit of flexibility. This in itself is enough of a reason to have him in this week's Fear Factor, as there's obviously 2 trains of thought with his scoring output for the 2022 NRL season. Now, for a fallen gun, he's a bargain at $457,700. So, look, is that value just too good to pass up? In 2021, Arrow scored 1,044 Supercoach points at an average of 52 points per game. He played only 47 minutes on average throughout his 20 matches last season, but he did score at an impressive rate of 1.11 points per minute. So look, in a nutshell, if he gets the minutes, he's bound to score the points. It's just really a case of whether or not he's going to get the minutes, and if he does, that PPM's pretty impressive, and he should have another good, decent season. I'm just not quite sure though. So his early draw looks a little tough, although he scored quite well on Friday night against the Broncos. Across his career, he scored on average 50 points per game with a 68 max against his former club, that is, being my Brisbane Broncos. On Friday night, Arrow scored 62 points, all in base, with 9 runs and 77 metres, including 30 post-contact metres. He also made 37 tackles in 71 minutes, which suggests, at the moment, it looks like the Bunnies are using him more as a bit of a tackle bot rather than an attacking weapon. In rounds 2 and 3, the Bunnies have big games against the Storm, where he's got a 48 average across his career with a 70-point max, and then he plays the Roosters in round 3 with a 49 average and a 67 max. So some pretty, not the flashiest of scores in there. So look, as a whole, I personally just don't see the excitement with Jai Arrow anymore. Unless he's guaranteed 80 minutes each week, if he gets the minutes, At his career PPM of over 1.1, it's a no-brainer. But till we find out more about what his minutes are actually really going to look like for the whole season, he's just not scary enough for me. At this rate, I've given him a 2 out of 5 fear factor rating. So the final player I'm going to have a look at this week is Addin Fonua-Blake. Now, when he switched on, AFB is one of the few front rowers in NRL and Supercoach that can actually match it with the likes of Payne Haas. In my opinion, at 505,000, he should be in almost 100% of teams. Strange enough, though, he's in pod territory at just 12% ownership. The Warriors' enforcer is a weapon in both attack and defence, and he's currently the leader of my Lightweights FC forward pack. AFB and the Warriors kicked off round 1 with a loss against St George, 28 points to 16. In previous seasons against the Dragons, Fonua-Blake averaged 44 Supercoach points per game and has a 76-point high game score against them as well. On Saturday, he scored 51 points, which included a line break, an offload, 2 tackle busts. He also made 18 runs and 23 tackles in his 64 minutes of game time, suggesting again that he will be just as effective in attack as he is in defence. Looking round 2, he plays the Titans on a Saturday afternoon at Seabus Super Stadium. He averages 50 Supercoach points against the Titans with a 65-point maximum. Considering the Titans started their season also with a loss, I've got no doubt that there'll be plenty of sparks flying this Saturday with the men in the middle as they knock heads. With New Zealand Warriors being based in Queensland, again due to COVID-19, this also looms as a bit of a grudge match as they're basically a local derby team now in Queensland. Obviously, neither team wants to start the season with 2 straight losses, so I think both teams are going to be pushing as hard as they possibly can. Now look, before the price changes kick in round 3, the Warriors face the West Tigers at Campbelltown Stadium. In previous seasons, AFB's averaged 57 points against the Tigers, and he has a 95-point high game as well, showing that he too can ton up, or, well, look, maybe not, but close enough. The Tigers have a new look forward pack with a mix of old heads as well as a few young bucks that will be itching to have a crack at AFB. And let's be honest, AFB's certainly not the kind of bloke that's going to take a backward step on any of that. In 2021, he scored 864 points for a game average of 58, and AFB played 15 games across the full NRL season last year and scored at 1.05 points per minute. So to me, it's a decent score. I've had him in my team for about the last 3 seasons. I love the bloke. I think he's fantastic. He's scary as hell to watch. You don't know what you're going to get with him, but he just runs over blokes with ball in hand, and he certainly hits them hard in the tackling. So considering he played roughly 55 minutes of game time per match across the season last year, if he continued to squeeze another 5 or 10 minutes out of the Warriors forward pack like he did on Saturday afternoon, his score should soon be on the up and up. And this in itself is not only proves that it's not only leaves Fonua-Blake as a bit of a scary player not to own in Supercoach, but he's scary to watch just on TV as well. Great fun to be around, I'd imagine also. Look, so for AFB, I've given him a 3 out of 5 fear factor rating. And yeah, I think you're nuts if you don't get him in the team, because I'm sure after he got another 9 minutes or 10 minutes last round, I reckon he's just going to keep going through the roof. So that's it, folks. That's Timmy O's fear factor after round 1. Giving you a few things to have a think about. Like I said, I've only got AFB in my team, but Payne Haas, he's just getting to the point where I think he's going to be too hard to pass up, and I've got to start looking at ways of moving things around in my team. Personally, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to hold the trade button this week, but my plan is essentially save a trade in the long run over the next 2 weeks by not making any this week and probably using that trade boost next week and making all 3. So thanks very much for listening. I hope I've helped you out in some kind of a way. Hopefully your forward pack scored more points last weekend than mine did. If not, have a think about some of the fear factor players and get them into your team. So guys, if you've enjoyed the fear factor, please jump on the supercoach360.com website. Please share my articles, Fear Factor with Timmy O. I've also got one that goes out sporadically called What's the Go with Timmy O. A little bit of a controversy corner type thing that just some of the big issues in rugby league, not just in Supercoach, that I try and question and look for the answers for. So keep your eye out for both of them. Outside of that, guys, thanks very much for listening, and hope to talk to you soon.